Most of the action is happening. So thank you for the support. Now, somebody says, Pastor, please do an exegesis on 28. On 28. As far as the gospel is concerned, they are enemies for your sake, but as far as election, they are loved on account of the patriarchs. Are you talking about Romans 11? Is that Romans 11? I think that is Romans 11. I can quickly do that because that's a valid question that that is definitely within the topic. So let me do that. Let me do that real quick. Okay. I don't know what's that question. Oh, that's Kennedy. So let me do this very, very quick. So this, when it's a valid question, I'm willing to go a little bit further. I'm willing to take the time because that's why I asked, are there questions? So Romans 11. Romans 11. Romans 11. Now, let's begin from verse 11. And I'm just going to do a quick exposition verse by verse. So I ask, Paul says, did they stumble in order that they may fall? By no means. Rather, through their trespass, through the trespass of the Israelites, through the breaking of the covenant, salvation has come to the Gentiles, so as to make Israel jealous. Now, if their trespass means riches for the world, and if their failure means riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their full inclusion mean? Now, what does full inclusion mean? Full inclusion means once they believe. Now, watch what Paul will say. Now, I'm speaking to you, Gentiles, inasmuch then as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry in order somehow to make my fellow Jews jealous, and thus save some of them. So that's why Paul was making his ministry so great amongst the Gentiles, so that his fellow Jews would say, but this is ours. This is supposed to be ours. Yes, it's supposed to be yours. You better grab it before it completely slips out of your hands. For if their rejection means the reconciliation of the world, what then will their acceptance mean but life from the dead? If the dough offered as first fruits is holy, so is the whole lump. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. Okay, now watch this. But, and this is where it begins to get very interesting, because a lot of times people don't think what is being said. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree. So some branches were broken off. Now, what is a tree? I want you to think about it. What is the tree? So the Israelites who are not believing had been broken off as branches. And the Jews, the Gentiles who are believing in Paul's time, were grafted in as branches. So both the Gentiles and the Jews are considered to be branches. So the question is, what is the tree? What is a tree? Jesus tells you in John 15. He says, I am the vine, I am the tree, you are the branches. You see that the tree called Israel is now identified only in Jesus Christ. So therefore, those who refuse to believe in the covenant of Israel with God, they were broken off. Those who believed in the covenant of God and Israel were grafted in. The Gentiles became Israelites. Okay, now, so he tells the Gentiles, therefore, don't be arrogant towards the branches, the other branches. If you are, remember, it is not you who support the root, but it's the root that supports you. Then you will say, branches were broken off so that I may be grafted in. That is true, Paul says. That is true. So they are no longer part of the tree. They are no longer part of the tree. You have been made a part of the tree. They were broken off because of their unbelief. You see this? So they are not a part of the tree. They are no longer getting the nourishing from the root. They are no longer drinking the sap of the covenant. They are no longer in the tree because of unbelief. But you stand because of faith. So do not become proud, but fear, he tells the Gentiles in the first century. For if God did not spare the natural branches as a result of the unbelief, neither will he spare you if you start to exhibit unbelief. Because pride is a manifestation of unbelief. Note then the kindness and the severity of God. Severity toward those who have fallen. Paul talked about it in Galatians 5. Those who have decided they want to go the way of the law have fallen away from grace. The grace was already there in the old covenant. They have fallen away from it. But God's kindness to you, provided you continue in his kindness, provided you continue in faith. Otherwise, you too will be cut off. And even then, if they do not continue in their unbelief, they will be grafted in. So how do they become the children of God again? By repenting of unbelief and by submitting to the practice of faith in God, which is through Jesus Christ. For God has the power of the gospel to grab them in again. He's talking about the power of the gospel. I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power. Do you see he talks about power? For God has the power. By which power can God grab them in? By the power of the gospel. For if you are cut off from what is by nature a wild olive tree, and you are grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will this, the natural branches, the natural, not the spiritual, the natural branches, the biological branches, for them to be grafted back into their own olive tree if they should become spiritual once again. Remember, the Old Testament people like Abraham were spiritual. Moses was very spiritual. So was Jeremiah. Nobody ever received the promises of God without being spiritual. Verse number 25. Lest you be wise in your own sight, I do not want you to be unaware of the mystery, brothers. A partial hardening has come upon Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way, all Israel will be saved. How? By bringing in the Gentiles. Because the Gentiles were part of Israel. Molly, I know I've talked about this before, so I'm not going to go deep into that. The Gentiles of the first century were from the northern tribes. The Jews were from the southern tribes. As it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will banish ungodliness from Jacob. And this will be my covenant with them when I take away their sins. This is the cross. So the deliverer did come from Mount Zion in heaven. He did banish ungodliness from Jacob by his finished work on the cross. So now, when you come to verse 28, as regards the gospel, they are enemies for your sake. Now, whose sake? Now, who is he speaking about? Kennedy. Paul is not addressing you and I. And he's not talking about modern day Israelites anyway. He is speaking about the Israelites of the first century. Because today, Israelites do not persecute Christians, do they? Remember that Paul was living at a time when Jews were killing Christians on a daily basis. So they were enemies of the gospel. They were killing Christians in Thessalonica. They were killing Christians in Philippi. They were killing Christians in Jerusalem. They were killing Christians throughout the Roman Empire. When is the last time you heard of a Jew killing a Christian? Paul is speaking in context. So as regards the gospel, they are, not they will be, they are presently at the time of the writing enemies for your sake. And your here is the Gentiles. But remember that today there are no Gentiles or Jews in Christ Jesus. You are not a Gentile, friend.